So it just came out that Trudeau admitted that Canada would be a failed nation, as if it wasn't for the US. It's really, really interesting what's going on with Trump obviously coming to power and all the things going on right now. I just thought we got to do like a big live stream about it. I'm sure a lot of people are going to have questions that I can't even answer. But let's just quickly get into this to start us off. So Trump claims Trudeau admitted Canada would be failed nation without $200 billion of US subsidies a year. And when he's saying subsidies, he's talking about the deficit that that the US has with Canada, meaning that the US is importing a lot more goods than they export to Canada. And that's the deficit that they have with Canada, essentially. But you've got to listen to this because it is just unbelievable.
Like with
and this
Canada,
literally just came out.
$200 billion a year with Canada. That's because we allow them to make cars. We allow them to take lumber. We don't need their cars. We don't need their lumber. We don't need their food products because we make the same products right on the other side of the border. It's sort of crazy. So we've just allowed that.
It's kind of funny because Trump, he, love him or hate him, he's pretty entertaining. He gets a lot of stuff completely wrong, though. And the reason why it's not that they've allowed Canada to make these goods, and it's not that Canada has allowed the US to make these goods. It's the free market that has determined that that's the best case. Now, he's coming in, playing central planner and saying, no, I'm going to manipulate everything. I'm going to pull the strings. And he wants to call the shots on everything. Completely anti-free market. But, you know, some people absolutely love and worship everything that he says. It's kind of almost becoming a cult now. He actually reminds me of like a right-wing version of Justin Trudeau. The two actually have more in common than they probably think because both are very authoritarian and they're central planners at heart. Obviously, Trump, he's going to do some good things and he's going to do a lot of bad things as well. But you just, I mean, this continues on and it's so funny.
Bad management has allowed it over the last 4 years in particular to become very imbalanced. And I said I call him Governor Trudeau, but he's Prime Minister Trudeau when he was Prime Minister. I asked him, why would we do that? Why? And he was unable to give me an answer. He said, I don't know. And I said, do you think it's fair that...
Well, that doesn't surprise us at all that Trudeau said that.
We're paying $200 billion to keep Canada going. And what would happen...
And it's not like they're paying $200 billion a year to keep Canada going. Let's actually call a spade here. They're paying for goods and services. They're paying for a lot of oil. In fact, we'll get into this real quick with the United States. So this is a great website, and I've actually linked it in the description. I'm just going to shrink this so we can see more on screen here. And basically, this is imports and exports on the right-hand side. I'll try and make it so that you guys can see it a little bit better. God, now it's way too small. But basically, the gist of this is when you look at Canada and the imports to the United States, it's 14% of imports to the United States. But when you look at Canada, the United States, in terms of imports, is 56.2%. It's a huge number. So obviously, the United States does matter to a certain degree more to Canada than Canada matters to the United States in terms of percentage. But then if you break it down, so if you go to the United States and then you select Canada here and you see what exactly they're importing, it is a lot. It's a lot of stuff, predominantly oil, crude oil. So obviously, if they're importing a lot of crude oil and he's going to slap a tariff on that, what's going to happen? Prices are going to rise for gasoline and all derivative products of crude oil, which is pretty much everything. As we know from what happened in 2021, 2022, with the inflation spike that we saw, with the supply chain issues, with what happened with crude oil prices when they were over $100 a barrel, we know that that puts significant pressure on inflation. So obviously, President Trump is kind of ignoring the elephant in the room, and he likes to make these remarks all the time and make these big, bold statements. But when you actually dissect them apart, they don't really mean very much. And if he actually implemented those statements, it would actually backfire and contradict what his mission is, which is he said that he wants to bring inflation down. And he's also said that he wants to cut interest rates. I mean, it's kind of crazy. I'm not surprised that Trudeau didn't have an answer for Trump because, let's be fair, Trudeau, he doesn't have a clue about the economy. I mean, just look where Canada is right now as an example of that. So that is really unsurprising. But when you also look at what Trump recently said, he's just recently praised President Xi Jinping, or however you say it. And he's saying that he's looking forward to getting along with China. Now, if you go to the United States and you look at their imports again, China represents a much bigger chunk here, 17.7%. So his ability to be able to tariff China is much less. So I guess we'll see what happens with that. But it's going to be interesting because if a lot of things happen that Trump is talking about, then not only is it going to be like a geopolitical nightmare, but it's also going to be a nightmare just for Canada, the United States, Europe, all these different countries, because you cannot just come in and say, I'm going to reorganize everything and everything is going to benefit the United States more, and I'm just going to do it. And we're not going to listen to the free market, which has been talking for the past 10, 20 years. The reason why a lot of goods are manufactured in China is because, guess what? They can't afford to make them in the United States. I'm sure a lot of these companies and some of the CEOs of these companies, they've come out before and they've said that, hey, they would like to make goods in Canada, make goods in the United States. But it's not feasible because if they did that, the price would be so high, nobody would buy it. So it's just like they live in a complete, it's like they have this, they envision this utopia that it's going to be like something from the 1950s, 1960s. And it just can never be like that anymore because the world has changed. And it's almost like these dinosaur politicians, which goes for a lot of them, unfortunately. It's almost like they haven't noticed that everything has changed and they don't want to acknowledge it. And the thing about Canada becoming the 51st state and everything like that, I mean, that's hugely disrespectful as well to a sovereign nation. I mean, it's kind of funny, and it's almost like and you don't even know whether he's joking, but if you actually listen in that video there, it doesn't sound like he's joking, and it sounds like he's going to try and use bully tactics to actually make that happen. And the funny thing is, on the one hand, he's saying, like, we don't need Canada, but we also want them to become the 51st state, and we wouldn't mind if that actually happens. So again, just Trump constantly contradicts himself, and you really got to watch that guy. I mean, he has really done so much, and he has a lot of power in just the first week. And he says that these tariffs of 25% are coming on February 1st. What impact is that going to have in Canada? Well, instantly not that much, but in the United States and Canada, you're going to have massive implications over the couple of months after that because everything is going to go up in price as a result of the input costs going up. And even if Canada does nothing, right, if they don't tariff anything, and tariff is just a tax. I just want to be clear here. You know, tariffs are just taxes. You know, Trump is trying to reduce the deficit in the United States. He's slapping, he might as well be slapping a 10% federal sales tax on everything. It's the same thing, and it's very sly and slimy and hidden. And if Canada does the same thing, I mean, just imagine. So your economy's already bad. Then a 25% tariff gets slapped on you. And then on top of that, you start slapping tariffs on everything. I mean, you're screwing your own citizens. So I know there's a lot of back and forth between conservatives and liberals on X at the moment, and this Team Canada, just complete BS, right, that's going on saying that, oh, yeah, we should slap tariffs on everything. And that is just going to be a total disaster. So we'll have to see what happens with that. But, you know, it's really happening, I think, in some ways, because Canada is in such a dire state at the moment. I mean, Canadians can't afford to feed themselves. Canadians can't afford homes. The cost of living is absolutely insane. You've got food banks collapsing. The immigration policies of the past decade are essentially coming to haunt the country right now with rising crime and all the rest of it. Things aren't looking very good. And then you've also got this now to just be laid in. And just remember that in 2022, the yield curve inverted. And we had no idea what was going to be causing that in the future. No idea. And still, we don't know exactly what is going to be causing that. But we do know that if you look at bonds and bond yields, particularly for the long end of the curve in Canada, they're a lot lower than other countries, which suggests a lot lower growth, a lot lower inflation, and a lot weaker economy. And the bond market typically is the smart money, and it's typically showing what's going to happen. So be very interesting to see. So I'll just get into some of your comments right now and see what's going on. I've turned off the super chat feature just so that if anybody wants to donate and help support my work, then please do buymeacoffee.com/Market Mania. I just don't have that super chat feature turned on anymore. So I'll put that on the screen as well. And if anybody goes there, I'll be refreshing it periodically throughout this stream to see if anyone's put any questions there as well. So thank you so much for your continued support. So I'm just reading through your comments right now. I don't think he's just talking about trade. What about military protection? We have no army. We rely on the US. Totally true. You know, Canada is completely dependent on the United States. And the United States sort of depends on Canada. I mean, you couldn't just, like if Canada said, okay, we're not exporting anything to you anymore. I mean, the thing is, though, when I really think about these trade wars, it's just so dumb. I mean, it just shows how out of touch these politicians and central planners really are, and banksters. I mean, and also the other thing is like, let's say, because Trump is always trying to make out that China is the biggest enemy. You know, China, oh my God, is the boogeyman. And they're totally dependent on China. I mean, imagine. I mean, he was talking about the Panama Canal and saying that that was run by the Chinese, which is totally factually incorrect. But just imagine this. Why on earth would you say about that when actually if China really wanted to inflict pain on you, and don't get me wrong, they'd be inflicting pain on themselves as well, because like I said, all trade wars, there's no winners in these type of wars. They just say, okay, we're not exporting anything to the US anymore. And then obviously US would retaliate and do the same. Both countries would be completely screwed in that scenario. Why would they try and weaponize the Panama Canal when they could just do that? Or they could just look at a subset of imports that the US is heavily dependent on China for and just say, okay, we're not exporting that anymore. So, you know, Trump tries to act like he's Mr. Macho Man and, you know, US has all the power and all these other nations. He can just walk around and conquer them all. But in actual fact, it's because the US is actually dying as a superpower and they remain one of the biggest superpowers, if not the biggest superpower in the world right now. But they're a country on the decline, exactly like Canada. And sure, they might be declining from a higher living standard, but they're on the decline, exactly like the UK, many countries in Europe. But what people forget is there are countries actually rising, like Mexico. You know, there are countries where things are actually getting better, like Mexico and Colombia and other countries, developing economies. Even India, which is actually really hilarious because obviously Canada has so much immigration from India, but India is actually a place where there is a lot of opportunities for skilled people. And I've had people reach out through this channel who are like highly successful, and they've lived in Canada for a number of years, and they're actually moving back now to India. Because if you have a good education and you got it from Canada or the United States or the UK, then in India, yeah, you can make serious money and you can have a good life. I mean, people see India as like this third world country, and definitely the difference between rich and poor is very, very wide there. But it's very wide also in the United States as well. So it's a huge country with a massive population. But there are countries that are on the rise, countries on the decline as well. So it's very interesting. So I'm just going through your comments here right now, seeing what people want to discuss. I saw about the Saudi Arabia 600 billion investment as well. It's yeah, and increase in oil production as well. I mean, the Exxon CEO came out and said it's not even like drill, baby, drill. It's not even like that anymore. It's about the economics of oil, whether it's actually feasible to drill for oil or not. It's not just because some president comes in with a massive ego and says, yeah, we're going to do this, do that, and I'm just going to dictate everything from here, and make America great again. I mean, it's become like almost a cult, essentially, now. I've just never, it's just the blind following that I just can't get over, the fact that people listen to a lot of these things and actually believe them. They don't even bother to think, hold on a second, this guy is a politician. He was actually in power before. He's saying he's going to do all these things now. Why didn't he do them before? You know, it's just like, it's the same old. It's the same old. I want to use profanity, but I'm not, because I know some people watch these things with their kids, bless them. So anyways, let's see what's going on. Trump is not joking. Yeah, I mean, when you look at that video, it really doesn't seem like he's joking. Let me just play the part where he's on about Canada becoming the 51st state again.
I asked him, what would happen if we didn't do that, if we didn't subsidize Canada? He said, we'd be a failed nation. And I said, then you should be a state. Because why are we paying all of that money to Canada when, you know, we could use it ourselves, right? So we take care of their military. You know, we're going to order about 40 Coast Guard big icebreakers, big ones. And all of a sudden, Canada wants a piece of the deal. They say, why are we doing that? I mean, I like doing that if they're a state, but I don't like doing that if they're a nation. Also, they've been very nasty to us on trade. Historically, Canada has been very, very bad to us, very unfair to us on trade. So, yeah,
by sending them goods that they want to buy. That's what they've been. That's what Canada has been bad about, essentially. That's what he's not saying, but is actually the truth of the matter. I mean, it's just ludicrous, though. But again, Canada becoming the 51st state. How? I mean, even trying to imagine how that would actually happen. Because, like, Quebec would never let it happen. Okay, maybe Alberta, it would probably be like a 50-50 vote if there was a referendum on whether they wanted to join the United States. Probably the same in Saskatchewan. But the rest of Canada, I highly doubt would want to become part of the United States. And let's face it, you know, the United States, they have a higher standard of living, definitely, than Canada. And right now, their economy is stronger than Canada. but they also have a lot of flaws. And when you actually balance them all out, you're actually near enough the same. I mean, it depends what you're doing, whether you're going to be more successful in a country like the United States compared to Canada. If you're like a skilled engineer, if you're working in tech, those sort of things, then sure, you're going to be way more better off in the United States. But then the lower end jobs actually do better in Canada and have a better living standard in Canada than in the United States. And it all kind of balances it out. Like the healthcare in the United States is terrible. And I got family in the United States. I know this well. And the healthcare there is terrible. The healthcare in Canada is terrible. They're two they're two different systems. One is public, the other is private. Neither is good. In fact, they're both examples of bad versions of those systems. If you want the worst example in the world of a private healthcare system, a model, it's the United States. If you want one of the worst examples of a public healthcare model, it's Canada. So, it's just like when you weigh them up, I mean, they're actually very similar. And, it's kind of, it's bad for both countries when they're fighting with each other. And you also, if you push Canada away, who are they going to go more towards? Europe and China. And who's supposedly the boogeyman? It's China, right? And again, but then on the other hand, cozying up to China with the article that I just pulled up. So again, you really have to judge these politicians on their actions at the end of the day. They like to talk and talk. Okay, let's see what those tariffs look like that Trump do. Let's see where he actually implements those tariffs. Because if it's just a tariff on clothes, there's not really going to be that much of an impact in Canada. And then, but is it actually going to be a blanket tariff on everything? I mean, geez, his economic advisors are absolutely terrible and should be fired. No pun intended with The Apprentice and all that. But, Mr. Fool, it's good to see you here. Keep getting notifications that my memory is smoking here. But they've said as well, Trump's been on about obviously Greenland, Panama, Mexico, Canada. Funnily enough, he's left out the UK, and I think that's more to do with actually a relationship that he has with potentially the next prime minister, which is probably going to be Nigel Farage, because they're good buddies. And that's the thing, man. With all these politicians, it's like people almost look the other way when it's their guy who gets in charge, and they're not critical anymore. And if you think I'm going to be any different when Pierre gets in charge than when Trudeau was in charge about judging him on his actions, then you're crazy. I'm going to be exactly the same. If Pierre does a lot of good, of course, I'm going to be the first person saying that that's a good thing. But if he's just like every other politician, then I'm going to be the first person saying that as well. And he likely will be. And this is why I don't throw my weight behind any politician, because you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. And I know people want to do it because the hopium of what they're saying, and Pierre has these rallies, and he's got that idea, I think, from Donald Trump. And they're sort of rallies that encapsulate hope that, the country's going to do better and move forward. And I'm sure it will, because it's been so catastrophically bad under Trudeau that really you could put a child in charge and you probably have a better job done than anybody else. I mean, the bar is so low to be better than Trudeau that really, is that much hope? I mean, oh gosh. Happy Friday, everybody. It's just hilarious. Trump jokes about making Canada the 51st state. This Canadian is for it after Trudeau. Imagine all blue secured borders not divided. Yeah, I mean, it's a big border and it's not even patrolled anyway properly, I don't think. And there's no... I mean, literally, I've driven along Zero Avenue in BC, and you could just get out your car and walk across into the United States. You've literally got houses in the US that have backyards, and then their back fence is literally the border. Like, they just hop over their fence and they're in Canada. So, and that's just because Canada have typically been so close in the relationship. Now, the thing is, I think a lot of the problems that Trump has with Canada actually stem from the fact that his ego was bruised when Trudeau was in charge. I think that Trump is a guy that holds grudges for sure. And of course, like anybody who's an egomaniac, that he will make all loads and loads of people suffer, not even that single person, because obviously if he puts a tariff on all of Canada, does that really affect Trudeau? Trudeau's going anyway now. No, it affects everybody in the United States. It affects people in Canada. It puts a lot of jobs at risk. But again, it's hard to see how much impact this is really going to have until it happens, because obviously I think that would just be a short-term thing, because he would realize pretty quickly that everything was going up in cost in the United States. He would probably slowly reverse parts of the tariff depending on what he actually tariffs and whether it is a blanket tariff, or whether he's actually doesn't want to introduce a federal sales tax. He knows the US government is broke, running at a massive deficit like all these other Western nations, but he doesn't want to implement tax hikes or a federal sales tax. That would never be palatable to his supporters. So it's better to just say, Canada is the boogeyman. We're just going to slap tariffs on everything. Little do the people who support him realize that they're going to be paying a lot of extra tax because of that. I mean, it just baffles me. That's why when you hear Canada is going to do a retaliation of that, just think more tax. Don't think tariff. It's like a stealth tax, essentially. He's afraid of a can UK union. Oh, I think that's Australia. Canada, Australia, UK union. Yeah, I mean the UK though. I mean they don't produce barely anything anymore. So I don't think a union between those countries. Australia has a lot of natural resources, but again, they don't actually produce that much. It's more they're a commodity nation that exports to China. China produces everything. I mean, people have got to realize, like, most countries are dependent on China, even though they want China to be made out to be the boogeyman. And whether you like or don't like China, these countries are dependent on it. And the free market decided that by essentially lots and lots of manufacturing went out there because it was cheaper. It was way cheaper. You could say it's subsidized by the Chinese government. I would agree with that. But so is manufacturing in the United States. So is manufacturing in Canada. If you look at all these, failed green deals that the Trudeau government did, Stellantis and the Volkswagen battery plant and all these deals, and where they're basically giving money away to these large corporations, it's just crony capitalism. And it's very similar to what happens in China with the subsidies from the government, which always makes me laugh when people are like, well, the Chinese cars are subsidized. And I'm like, yeah, so are the ones in the US. Remember in 2008 when all the manufacturers went bust in the United States, the vehicle manufacturers, and the government came out and bailed them out? It's the same thing, subsidized by the government, but it's just a different way of putting it. And I think it's just the way the media wants to frame it. And Charlotte, thank you so much for sending me that Substack thing about X and how that was weaponized during the election, because that was really an interesting read. So yeah, I want to thank you for that. Housing should be dirt cheap in Canada. It should be, because when you think about the think about the input cost to housing. You've got the cost to construct the house. Okay, you can definitely argue that that's gone up over time, but the main component of the cost is the land cost, and there's no short supply of land. It doesn't matter where you are in Canada, there's really no short supply of land. And a greatest example of this is Alberta, because if you've ever visited Alberta, especially places like Calgary, then you just drive east 150 kilometers from Calgary, and it's all flat, barren, grassland. There's a lot of farmland that farmers are trying to unload because of the droughts that have happened year after year, because new generations don't want to farm the land anymore and don't want to keep it going. And whether you agree with that or disagree with that is neither here or there. They want to unload it. There's a lot for sale. And still, the land prices are so inflated, and you've got to ask the question, well, why? And it's just because of a bubble. That's how you can see a bubble, is when you zoom out and think of the bigger picture for a second. It's just a land bubble that has created the housing bubble. I mean, it was an eye-opener earlier last year when I drove from Calgary to Airdrie, and I saw that literally all the farmland was for sale in between Calgary and Airdrie, and there was just massive development northwards as well. And you look at that and you think, well, yeah, the land is all there. And why aren't the developers buying the land? Well, it's probably too expensive. They probably want too much money. And it's just like, and the margins are actually, people think it's all the developers that are making money. And, Matti was smart because they bought all the land, long time ago. And basically, Matti obviously then had all the land, and as the cities expanded, it was already there and they could develop. And they did a good job of also making like cookie cutter houses that are pretty lousy quality with poor finishes, and just making a lot of money. And obviously, you think about how things have changed now. Like if a developer wants to buy a huge farm up and the land cost is X, and then you've got the cost to construct is Y, the actual amount that they make is not as much as you think it is. It's probably pretty slim margins, and that's why they don't even buy the land in a lot of cases. So it's and they all rely on loans as well. They don't have this cash sat around. They have to get loans from the banks, and if the banks don't want to give the loans to the developer, and this is the thing, this is why private debt to GDP is so high, is because a lot of the money that's lent out in terms of the debt revolves around real estate in some way, be it the land, be it the loans to construct a massive condominium in Toronto, like that building that stalled on Bloor and Young, I believe, the One, I think it's called. I watched a good documentary about that called the B1N. B1M, I think, is the name of the YouTube channel, if I remember right. But you watch that because that's not like a Canadian channel. That's just like they do global stuff when it comes to real estate and construction. And you watch that and you think, yeah, this seems like so 2008. So 2008 when you listen and watch that. So, man, we're 32 minutes in. I honestly can't believe that. Okay, sorry. Yeah, that's good, Brian. What if join the USA and Gavin Newsom becomes president in 2028? Yeah, exactly. And when you have somebody who's basically coming in and they're putting in all these executive orders, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. What happens when the guy you don't like gets in and then does similar things, but these are things you don't agree with at all? It just sets a bad precedent for the future and puts you on a slippery slope downwards. That's the thing. It's more government. Why not? Here's a bright idea. Why doesn't Donald Trump drop corporate tax rates, make the US one of the lowest tax places in the world to place their manufacturing business? Why doesn't he do that instead of trying to slap tariffs on his trading partners and do it that way? Like that's going to suddenly bring back manufacturing, when the person who will bear the brunt of that cost will be the consumer. It's not going to be the importers. It's not going to be the exporters. It will be the consumer. because if you look at all the studies on tariffs, they all come back to the same thing, that 92% of them 92% of the cost of the tariff gets passed on to the consumer, if not 100%, obviously just depending on the economic environment that you're in. If you're in a recession, a tariff slapped on TVs, nobody's buying TVs, yeah, the prices might not increase, but the companies might go bankrupt that are selling them because they can't make a profit anymore. I mean, it's, you just can't move the pieces around on the economic chessboard like that far and not expect wide-reaching consequences. And it will be so interesting over the next 6 months if some of these things that Donald Trump has pledged to happen actually happen, and it won't be good. It won't be good at all. I mean, it makes the real estate problem in Canada, well, the real estate bubble, the collapse, and the essentially recession and depression that Canada is in right now, just pales in comparison to all of the things that Donald Trump is pledging to do and what impacts that would have on the world and on inflation and all these other things. But funnily enough, the bond market doesn't think he's going to cause that much inflation. And the reason why I trust that bond market more is because it's the smart money. These are the people that know Donald Trump. And these are the people that are on the inside and they're getting all the tips from the government. They know what's going on. And basically, that's why you have the yield curve inverts. These people, it's not that they've got a sixth sense. It's just that they're on the inside. They've got the inside scoop on all this stuff. And that's really why I believe the yield curve inverts and why it should be trusted so much. But yeah, the yield curve inversion, I mean, maybe Donald Trump's about to send the whole world into a depression with what he's about to do. Who knows? We're going to find out. But yeah, it's absolute Trudeau's a communist. He's more like a blend of a fascist and he's got elements of fascism and communism. And I mean, he's been very authoritarian, exactly like Donald Trump. The two actually have a lot in common, even though they're on opposite sides of the aisle, especially when you think about what happened with the trucker convoy. And Trudeau then basically turned Canada into a dictatorship. I mean, he was able to circumvent Parliament, to freeze people's bank accounts, to do things which are just like dictator-like, essentially, make people political prisoners. And then obviously, basically, you had it determined by the courts that he was wrong to declare the Emergencies Act. And what happened to him? What happened to him? He's still the Prime Minister of Canada until, like last time I checked, he's still Prime Minister of Canada. And this guy, broke the law, turned the country into a dictatorship, has prorogued Parliament. It's just, it really is. Canada is just in the worst place right now. And then everything layered on that Trump is doing, he's just taking advantage of a weak country, essentially, right now. Yeah, there's a lot of crown land owned by the royal family. People cannot build or hunt on. Yeah, that's totally true. There is a lot of crown land in Canada. And crown land, King Charles, that is owned by the British aristocracy. Even if it's through the Governor General of Canada, she reports to who? King Charles. So it's and they are at the top of everything. So it's like a democracy in practice more than in principle. Not in principle, more than it's just not really a democracy when you have the monarchy at the top of everything. It's totally different. And obviously a republic, that's a different thing altogether as well. And I do think that Canada would be better off if it was a republic. I mean, I don't like in the UK that they have the House of Lords. I don't like in Canada that you have the Senate and people are appointed to the Senate by who? The Prime Minister. And that gives them too much power. It concentrates too much power in the Prime Minister's hands, somebody who people don't actually vote to elect. He's just an elected leader of the party when you really think about it. Nobody votes for the Prime Minister apart from his particular constituents. So when you think about him having all that power, it's very undemocratic, actually. And the Senate and the House of Lords, they could be elected representatives, but they're just not. I mean, it's just, and that should change. That should completely be reorganized. But the thing is, I don't think they want that to happen. I don't think the power structures want that to happen behind the scenes, because how can they manipulate things if they aren't in control or don't have some sort of fail-safe that if the House of Commons passes a piece of legislation, that then they can basically say no. They can strike it down. And obviously, Canada's parliamentary system is just based on the UK parliamentary system. Yeah. Yeah, there is, it's almost like it's not just Canada when it comes to the high immigration over the past 10 years. If you look at most of Europe, it's exactly the same thing. So it really isn't just Canada. So yeah, it's incredibly interesting. But now, obviously, Canada is starting to reverse those policies. And obviously, when the marketplace has obviously adapted as well to deal with it to a certain extent, like a lot of these low wage jobs rely now on these students coming in. Like, how are they going to function now? It's going to be very interesting to see how things work out. But obviously, the bond yields are saying inflation isn't going to be skyrocketing anytime soon in Canada, which says that growth and inflation as well is not going to be that high either. Agree, California has lower taxes than Alberta. Productivity and competition are a sin in Canada, sadly. That's part of the reason I'm out. And yeah, a lot of people are leaving Canada and they're going to the United States. And yeah, when you look at a place like Alberta and compare it to places like Washington, I mean, somebody sent me a great comparison. I've looked everywhere for this email like 10 times to try and find it. Whoever sent it me, if you find it, send it me again. It was like a basic comparison between all the states and the provinces in Canada. And it put Alberta with like Oregon and Washington State, which are very left-leaning states in terms of taxes and policies as well. So it was really good, though. It was really comprehensive. But I've looked so many times to try and find that, to bring it up in live streams, and I just can't find it. So he wants our resources. Yeah, that could be part of it. Canada has a lot of natural resources. And yeah, the US for a long time has been a country that has pursued endeavors in foreign countries in order to seize control of their natural resources. The interesting thing is, obviously, Trump says he's going to put economic pressure on Canada to make them become the 51st state. I mean, yeah, I don't really understand what the angle is with that, because you're just bringing up more and more anti-US sentiment, not just in Canada, but in lots of places around the world. When you're attacking like Greenland, or whether it's Panama, or whether it's the United States, or whether it's Mexico, it's just the same thing. I mean, when I went to Mexico and Donald Trump was in charge, I remember the guy at the car rental place that we went to in the Baja. He like was so proud of it. He basically showed me this Donald Trump figurine with like the Mexican flag shoved up his backside. It's just like, but he was so proud of it. And But yeah, that kind of anti-US sentiment just goes up and up and up. And then it pushes the likes of Mexico and all these other countries closer to China, because China are the superpower that would be second in the world. If you said that the US was the biggest superpower, China would be right behind there. So if the US is just, and they can't, that's the thing. Like, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to work out they cannot just cut themselves off from the rest of the world, start producing everything there without huge consequences, which would totally mess up the US economy. No shadow of a doubt. I mean, think about how much it would cost for all these companies to relocate from China to the United States, how much time it would take, and how long Donald Trump's going to be president, even though I did see he's trying to amend the Constitution now as well, so he can do a third term. But that's not going to happen. Well, let's hope it doesn't happen. I mean, it's all probabilities at the end of the day. So we'll see what happens. Prorogue, why don't they just say they don't just discontinue Parliament? Because they love a new world. They love a new word that people don't understand. I mean, before I heard prorogued, I had no idea what it meant. Maybe they just wanted everybody to basically go online, or maybe it's just old English language from when Parliament was set up, and that's the legal and technical term that they have to use. I'm not too sure. But yeah, everybody was looking that up when it came out. I was there for that Axe the tax and the truckers rally. Sad how leadership invaded people's privacy, shutting down their accounts. Yeah, exactly. And, you have to think as well that, okay, if this was a protest that I didn't agree with, you can just come up in your head with a protest that you don't agree with and you wouldn't want to happen. If they did it then, would you agree with it? And part of the problem I have is a lot of people, when it comes to their guy and when it comes to a protest that they disagree with, they think it's okay. And it's just not okay. I mean, it's any protest. If they're not breaking the law and they're not doing anything wrong, then they should be allowed to protest whether I disagree or agree with whatever they're saying. And, protests, they're always vocal. Of course, they're going to be in some people's faces, generally the people that they want to get their message across to. Otherwise, they're not going to change anything. Nothing's going to change. I mean, I'm sure the people in Ottawa who heard all the truck horns during the Freedom Convoy, to them it was like harassment, they thought. But, they're trying to get their message across. And it's the same thing if there was a protest that I didn't agree with and they were doing the same thing. Like I said, as long as they're not breaking the law, when they start breaking the law, then yeah, those people who do break the law should be dealt with. But the Freedom Convoy was not that. And we're like 2 years, no, we're 3 years now. Wow. 3 years onward from that. And yeah, still we got the same guy in charge. It's just absolutely unbelievable. Blackadder. Oh yeah, that's Anyway, guys, I think I'm going to leave it there. I want to thank you so much for participating in this. I'm going to try and make this like a monthly thing, so we'll try and do it every end of the month. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, I would highly recommend that you check out that video there. If you want to help support the channel, go to buymeacoffee.com/marketmania. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, guys. Have a great weekend.